my name is Rina Kagawa. Today we talk about how the content of progress notes affect their utility for readers and the burden placed on writers. EHRs should support clinical decision-making. Since there is no widely accepted terminology for clinical reasoning, it is currently difficult to store the information it requires as structured data in EHRs. Therefore, a practical solution is to include the information that is useful for clinical reasoning and decision-making in the progress notes. Progress notes are regularly read by many clinical professionals from diverse backgrounds who use them in their own clinical reasoning and clinical decisions. The widespread use of EHRs and their implementation of standards for data exchange have made it easier for multiple clinical professionals to read progress notes both inside and outside of the hospital. We believe that progress notes will play an increasingly important role as foundational documents for communication among clinical professionals and patients. Our basic idea is that progress notes that balance the burden on writers and the utility for readers are the ideal documents for improving interprofessional communications in the EHR era. In this research, as a first step in the proposing progress notes design and description support in the EH era, we focus on the content of progress notes and conduct experiments to test how the content of progress notes affect both the burden on writers and the utility for readers. We have two objectives. First, we want to clarify what kind of content is useful for various clinical professionals in the progress notes. Second, we want to clarify the document's burden on medical doctors by requesting certain content that is useful for various clinical professionals be added in the progress notes and discuss what kind of support should be developed that will be effective for both writers and readers. In this presentation, due to the time limitation, we present only experiments 2 and 3 described in our paper. For the experiments, we used published progress notes written in Japanese. We would like to appreciate it if you access the website and download the dataset. The threshold of p-value for significance was 0.01. The contents examined in this study were determined by referring to 26 relation concepts between clinical terms: absence of findings, alteration by activity, causes, description of knowledge or experience, intention of intervention, progress and prognosis, and recommendation, 7 contents. In experiment 2, we investigated which content increased the utility for readers with diverse specialties. First, 2 medical doctors annotated 25 published progress notes with a phrase meaning each of the 7 types of contents. The phrases were separated by punctuations or conjunctions. Then, for each of the 25 shared progress notes in which all the content types were annotated, the experimental notes were created in which the phrase annotated with each type of content were deleted from the original shared progress notes. Then the participants answered the questions: do you think that this document is useful in clinical practice? Using 11-point Likert scale for each document. This figure showed the differences between the usefulness scores of the original notes and the corresponding experimental notes for each type of content. When the readers were medical doctors, the null hypothesis that the mean usefulness scores of the original note and that of the experimental notes would be equal was not rejected for all the types of contents. While when the readers were nurses, the null hypothesis that was rejected for absence of findings, alteration by activity, causes, intention of intervention, and recommendation. When the readers were other clinical professionals, the null hypothesis was rejected for absence of findings, alteration by activity, causes, intention of intervention, and recommendation. In the experiment 3, we examined whether the burden on the MDs would change with the obligation to cover useful content when compared to cases where the requirements for the notes were open-ended. The experimental procedure consisted of 5 steps. In step 1, the participants described the dummy progress notes for the dummy patients on the screen prepared for these experiments that simulated actual EHRs in Japan. In step 2, the participants answered the question, do you think that this document was easy to write? According to an 11-point Riccati scale. In step 3, the participants were instructed to add one type of content that was randomly selected from the 7 types of contents. In step 4, participants followed the instructions and added the information to the dummy progress notes they wrote in the first step in this experiment. And in step 5, the participants answered the same questions shown in the second part of this procedure. This figure showed the differences between the writability scores before and after the instruction. The null hypothesis that the writability scores before and after instruction would be equal was not rejected for all types of contents. Discussion. The findings in regard to asking medical doctors to add the useful content after freely writing the progress notes might result in progress notes that are more useful for various readers without increasing the documentation burden, revealed that even very simple authoring support is effective and can be immediately applied in various clinical situations. In the near future, we'll try to continue the experiments by assuming more specific clinical reasoning, clarifying the impact of how the progress notes are arranged, and discussing the effect of rhetoric. Medical doctors could use their background knowledge to supplement the information in the progress notes, while nurses and other clinical professionals may not be able to do so. In the future, we'd like to propose an automatic description support system for personalized descriptions for writers and readers by examining their background knowledge in detail. This study found that simply requesting that medical doctors add the useful content after freely writing the progress notes might result in progress notes that are more useful to readers other than medical doctors without increasing the documentation burden. The understanding is crucial for designing a description support system for the progress notes that is effective for the better interprofessional communication. Thank you.